Welcome to Conscious Talks. My name's Lorne Brown, and today I have with me psychologist and author Kyle Davies. I got introduced to Kyle through his book, The Intelligent Body. Now, usually, Kyle, I have hard copies and I show them in the room, but I have you digitally. I've been listening to your book.
I have it over my shoulder.
There you go. So
that's where he lives.
And I was fascinated because I really love the idea of how, there's this intelligent body. This is I practice Chinese medicine. It's this understanding that the body has this ability, this innate ability to self-heal, to self-regulate. We use a loose term to find balance, homeostasis. And I really liked how you talked about the physical, but then the mental, emotional, and then you got into the conscious and spirituality. So I just want to give my audience a little brief introduction, and then I'm going to ask you to share a little bit more. And then I just want to ask you some questions about your book and the work that you're doing. So you guys should know that I'm Kyle. He's a chartered psychologist, coach, and author. He's the creator of Energy-flow coaching, which provides a framework and process that can be applied to a health setting for eradicating symptoms of chronic fatigue and pain, anxiety, and depression. And he also offers workplace setting for improving their motivation, creativity, performance, and clarity of mind. So welcome to Conscious Talks, Kyle. I'm glad to have you here today, and I'm really interested in your background as well.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me. And yeah, God, it sounds like I do a lot, doesn't it? All of that stuff you just listed off.
We're interviewing this during 2021. The pandemic is continuing. But even before the pandemic, a lot of people experience chronic fatigue syndrome. They experience fibromyalgia, anxiety, feeling depressed. Is there a connection for all these symptoms, diseases? Is there an underlying cause that you have come across?
Well, I think there's a connection. And I know that because lots of people with these particular conditions often don't like to, it's like, well, I've got chronic fatigue. I don't have depression. I don't have fibromyalgia. I know what I've got. And I perfectly understand that, and people want a diagnosis. In all the work I've done, I'm coming at this from the perspective of a practitioner. So it's like I've been at the coalface, I've been working with people. I'm not really coming at it from an academic perspective. It's certainly not a medical perspective. So I suppose the reason I mention that is because I am looking to simplify things that people can work with. So there's a metaphysical or spiritual aspect to the work that I do. But in terms of, well, do I see a connection between all these things? For me, when you look at something like anxiety or depression, I think they're umbrella terms for a diverse range of symptoms. The symptoms can be physical and emotional. So I'm not a massive fan of the idea of mental health and physical health. I think that many of these health challenges and symptoms are related to a body and brain that is in a perpetual state of stress. Looking at a very broad idea of stress, as you would say, somebody's system, mind-body complex, out of balance or wobbling, as I might say. So if homeostasis is not reached and the system is continually battling for that, then things break down and symptoms ensue. So I approach symptoms from that perspective. I think obviously everybody is different. Everybody is wired in a different way. We are all predisposed to many types of health challenges. So I suppose I look at it that, well, your system, your complex is stressed, and it's what's happening is it's presenting symptoms to us. One person may have anxiety, the next person may have migraines, the next person may have fatigue. And yes, there'll be individual bits that we can uncover and decipher from the symptoms. But as a very general, broad base, I'm looking at it, okay, trauma and stress seem to be the primary issues involved.
And when you're saying stress, You're not thinking it's the environmental stress, but more the individual's perception to that stress. It's the how they internalize the stress, the
Well,
situation.
I suppose I look at stress in a broad way. So for me, I think that, again, simplifying everything down, I think that whether it's the environment, whether it's something physical or something emotional, the stress response is largely the same. The simple way I represent this to clients is say, well, it's almost like we've got a stress bucket, and if there are stresses in your environment, or if there are physical stresses or emotional stresses, they're all going in your stress bucket. Now, because I work on my own, and there are not that many people that have heard of me. I tend to find that people that I work with have dealt with sleep, nutrition, exercise, chemicals, their environment. So when they come to me, the big piece that's missing is that emotional, spiritual piece. So ultimately, that's the work that I do. But I do recognize, well, yeah, stress is stress.
Now, you've used the term metaphysical and spiritual, and you are a chartered psychologist. And when I think of psychologists, I think of talk therapy, cognitive behavior therapy. So maybe can you share how your approach is different from conventional practice, please?
There is. I take clients on a little bit of a journey, and at the start of the journey, I invite them to open up to the idea that symptoms are useful messengers. So symptoms are trying to tell us something. But as we go on that journey, I invite clients to open up to the idea that rather than them being separate from life and life happening to them, that they are in fact part of the flow of life. Life is a river that's moving along, and we're part of that, or we can kind of guide our flow, or we can try to fight against it. So a lot of what I do is invite people to open up to that idea. Well, there's this. We could call it a true self, or a body wisdom, or a soul, or something that is innate within us, and there is this innate well-being that we're all connected to. That's the flow of life. And generally what happens is, as we grow older, if we think about children, they're very much in the moment, in the now, just being. They're being life. They're connected to life. They're being life. As we get a little bit older, we go through our teenage years, we become conditioned. We have stories, narratives, beliefs. We start to do life. We become disconnected from life. And for me, what happens then is many of our problems ensue as a result of the fact that rather than us just being life, we are interacting with a version of life that we've created, like clouds around our head. So in terms of, how do you've got this idea that a symptom is purposeful, and I'm part of life. So life and the flow of life communicates, and this true self communicates, in my mind, through the body, through feelings, intuitions, realizations, but through the body. So a huge chunk of what I do is the idea of, we need to, if we can realign with what I'm calling our true self, we come back into the body and we align with the communications of the true self. When that happens, we can begin to flow and we can realize our innate well-being. So it's a little bit different. Sorry, I'm going on here. It's a little bit different from a cognitive intervention. So if I can just give a quick example of what I mean by that. It's and this may seem overly simplistic, but it's like if a person really loves football and they're just passionate about football and they go and see their team every week and they talk about football to their friends, and then their team loses and they're devastated. They're in tears, they're really upset. And in order to make themselves feel better, they talk to themselves and they say, "Oh yeah, but there'll be two players that are off, that are back next week. They've been injured. They'll be back next week. We're playing at home next week. It'll be okay." So they can make themselves feel better by staying in that paradigm of, well, yeah, I'm connected to football, and football really, that affects how I feel. Now, I think a lot of healthcare options cognitive behavioral therapy being one of them, that is interacting in that level. It's accepting that model that, well, I'm connected to football, and if football's not good, I'm not good. But I can talk myself around. I can make myself feel better. What I try to do is have people understand, well, I'm okay regardless. I'm absolutely fine regardless. And I can enjoy the ups and downs of the football, but I'm imprinting meaning on that game. And that's why I feel that. And isn't it wonderful that I can feel that? But it's not me. I'm fine regardless of those feelings. So that's a little kind of, I suppose, a little version. My idea is, well, we extrapolate that football thing to everything in life. And then we think we get sucked into, and then we struggle because we're sucked into these beliefs and those sorts of things.
I'm going to follow up with a question then, because, this is Conscious Talks, and you work on the conscious level, consciousness level as well. So when you're using your football analogy, then are you subscribing to a lot of the consciousness work of being in the present moment, being in the now, learning to accept what is, and accepting is not being resigned to it, not meaning that you like it, but is that what you're sharing?
To a certain extent, there's just this other level that is like, well, what if I am okay? What if I'm connected to everything else and I'm part of this flow of life? And with that, I'm fine. So there is an acceptance, an allowance, and a compassion for self, and the situations and the experiences that I have. But it becomes easier to know that, again, with that, as you mentioned, the homeostasis, the self-correcting. When I know that I'm in turmoil here, but I'm actually okay. And actually, if I try to fix myself, I'll probably just feel worse. But if I can remember that, well, I'm okay, and I will self-correct, then I can have the experience and I can self-correct back to feeling much better.
Do you have tools then to help people get into that flow? Because, again, in the conscious work, there's this idea of make your inner world more real than your outer world. And so if you've lost your job or things are changing, relationships, you don't see the money in your bank, so you're looking at what is, how do you have people feel it's okay? Because in their mind, they're thinking, their judgment, the meaning they're giving to their bank account, et cetera, is I'm not okay. So how do you help people get into that flow so they can experience that self-correcting, knowing that I am okay? How do you get them to believe it on a cellular level that I am okay versus just empty positive thoughts that, okay, I've lost my job, my spouse, and I have no money in my bank account, but I'm okay?
I think it's a great question, and I think the critical point with it, well, there's a couple of key points. The first point is that it may be that human part of me in that moment does not feel okay, but allowing myself to feel the turmoil of whatever is happening to me, that's important. The other thing that goes with it is that the feelings that we have come from within us. And because we have a default that brings us back to feeling okay, nothing needs to change out there in order for us to feel okay. So simply knowing that, you could lose a job and then you would be in real trauma, in real strife, in real fear, pain. And yes, embrace those feelings in the moment. But your head will want to frantically try to talk yourself around. But critically, what I would do is I'd invite a patient to believe that, well, it's entirely possible because of your self-correcting mechanisms that at any time you could just all of a sudden feel okay. It's just because you're in the clouds and you've set up this idea that, well, if I lose my job, I'm going to feel awful because my life is falling apart. And well, yeah, in that moment, the human feels awful. But the idea that, well, what if I could feel okay and still and I'm still losing my job, but what if I could feel okay? By disengaging with the thinking and the ruminating, generally what happens is people do bounce back quite quickly. Of course, you mentioned earlier, talking through my little bio there, clarity of thought. What generally happens is that you get clarity of thought then. When you when you disengage from the thinking, that comes with, oh my God, I'm in turmoil. Oh my God, I've lost my job. I'm going to lose my wife. I'm not going to be able to afford my car payments. What am I going to do? When you're involved in that ramped up, crazy thinking, well, you can't make a decision, and you generally feel worse and worse and worse. But if you have that sense of, all right, well, this is not a good time to think. My thinking is doing this thing, and it's not that helpful. It's not me. It's just this. It's running this crazy path. If I can disconnect from that, and yeah, there is a bit of coming back to the body, coming back to the now. If I can disconnect from that, I know that I am ultimately this true self, which is this bigger part of me. That's the okay bit. The human part of me now doesn't feel okay, but the true self is okay. So if I disconnect, I will quickly bounce back. I'll quickly come into that space, that self-corrected space of clarity of mind and feeling a little bit better.
And I like this idea of you can be okay. You have this free will. The free will is you get to choose how you feel. You may have lost your job. However, you get to choose how you're going to respond to that. And it sounds like from your book and the work you do is you're teaching people, coaching people how they can interpret, perceive, and feel differently.
Well, there's a really interesting point there. So I'm saying that we are not in control, but we don't need to be. So if I lose my job today, I'll feel fear. I'll feel a huge range of emotion. What I'm saying is it's really important that I allow myself to feel those. That's an opportunity to me, for me. So I'm going to allow myself to, I'm not going to apply any cognitive techniques to try to or shove that or block out these feelings. I'm going to fully feel them. But when I fully feel them without having to solve them, they move through me.
This is what in my practice, I call it my notice, accept, choose again approach. But when you get present with this, when you said, will you fully feel it? So, and just for the audience, how I'm interpreting this, when you fully feel it, you are actually being present. You're in the now, your present moment. And when you're present, thinking of the author Eckhart Tolle, The Power of Now, he says when you're present, you can be at peace in an unhappy situation.
Absolutely.
Right. And so that's the key. So you're calling it fully feeling it. Yeah. Try not to stuff it away. So we're not indulging in it. You're not saying you're not indulging. You're not going victim and you're indulging in it. And you're not denying it and being resigned. You're just allowing yourself to be what they call mindfulness, witness, being curious. Just allow yourself to experience it. Because all feelings, emotions, sounds like, again, reading your book, are vibrations and frequencies. So I'd like to ask you a little bit on the metaphysical. What do you mean by vibration and frequency, and how do you feature that in your work?
I think that I feature it from a perspective that I think we are all vibrational beings. And I think that we kind of exist on a bit of a spectrum, really, where at one end of the spectrum is kind of a bit more high vibrational, higher consciousness, where we're sort of a little bit more, as I would say, aligned with our true self. And then at the other end of the spectrum, low vibrational, low consciousness, sort of misaligned with true self. And it's almost a little bit like at that lower end of the spectrum, we feel limited. We have a negative view of ourselves. Our emotions are very volatile. There's a lot of mental chatter. Now, I think we bounce around on that spectrum, and that's part of normal life. There are ups and downs, there are ebbs and flows. We bounce around. But what I'm looking to do is saying, right, well, as we align more with our true self, which is coming inside, coming into the body, aligning with the flow of life, as we align with that true self, we kind of nudge ourselves up this spectrum and our vibration kind of rises. When that happens, we feel a greater sense of oneness. Most people have had this experience where you just kind of feel good. It's not that anything is necessarily happening, but you kind of feel at peace, you feel at work, and your mind is a little bit clearer, and then good things sort of happen. So that's the sort of the high vibe, low vibe. And from my perspective, we can't necessarily cognitively shove ourselves up that consciousness spectrum, but we can gently nudge ourselves through being present and having that awareness of, all right, well, I'm connected to all that is, and I'm actually okay.
So do you subscribe to that we are connected? There's this consciousness and we're all connected. We are one.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then are you seeing a conscious shift? So on the outside, there's a major shift. We see things politically changing. We see natural, like I'm talking about fires and earthquakes and flooding. And then we see pandemics and a massive shift. So how are you seeing this from a spiritual lens? What's happening?
Yeah, I do see it. You know, we're kind of in this. We've had this global reset, haven't we? And I do in my work. I've seen lots of people that appear to be waking up, and I think we are collectively going through this kind of detox, this cleansing, this changing, this shift. And I think it is a vibrational shift where collectively we are hopefully all moving a little bit more higher vibe. So we feel a bit more connected to each other. We're a little bit more empathic. Maybe there's a little less hostility and aggression at the end of the day, at the end of the cycle, when we kind of get there. So my view is into the spiritual perspective of the work, and I suppose what I see as my mission is I feel that when people begin to get ill, it's because there is a misalignment from the flow of true self. So true self for me is, you could call it higher self or soul. It's a flow of consciousness that connects us to everything else. Just like the trees, the flowers, they're connected to the flow of life, part of life. And yeah, I think that, I see my role as when people have a chronic fatigue, a fibromyalgia, anxiety, depression, they're somehow, unfortunately, have kind of become somewhat misaligned from true self. And their body is letting them know through the symptoms. So the symptoms are purposeful. And what we do is we bring them back in alignment, and we do it by getting into the body and through the body.
So what can people do if we're in this conscious shift and there's this consciousness happening, a shift happening? What can we, as on the individual level, what can we do to help with our frequency, our vibration, to raise our consciousness? So they call it wu wei, so you're with the flow versus fighting the flow. And it sounds like when you're fighting the flow, you may get symptoms and it can be very uncomfortable. And if you're in the flow, even though the situation is not what we would describe from the ego as pleasant, you can be at peace again in that unhappy situation. So the question is, what can we do, or what are you recommending on an individual level to help play with your vibration, raise your vibration?
I think first and foremost, it's looking inward. I think and it sounds very simple, doesn't it? But we live in a very externally focused culture. How do I match up against what's going on out here? So coming into the body, increasingly paying attention to underneath it all, deep down in here, where do I feel pulled? Let me get a sense of, maybe there is this true self. Maybe there's a wisdom in my body. Let me pay attention to it, and let me allow the feelings, the emotions, the intuitions. Let me allow everything that I feel, and be curious about it. Create space for it. So it's being inward looking rather than outward looking. It's allowing what comes up rather than resisting or controlling. And those, it's age-old ideas, isn't it, really? But it interests me in my own life, my own experiences, and working with clients, how resistance and control play out hugely. You talking earlier about if you've lost your job and this sort of stuff. I went through divorce a couple of years ago, and I really had to walk my talk because it knocked me on my ass. I was devastated, but I had to really embrace this idea. And I would spiral down with thinking. Then I'd have the realization, do you know what? Nothing needs to change for you to feel okay. You have it innate well-being within you. And when I would do that, I would sort of realign. And then shortly later, I would kind of feel okay. And again, like the Eckhart Tolle quote you just gave, it was weird. It was weird for my head because I would feel fine, but my ego would be going, yeah, but your life is falling apart. You can't feel fine. And then, of course, I would, I'd get involved in that thinking and the ego, and I drag myself down, and then pop back up again with that realization. No, it's fine. All is well.
Seems like there's a big resurgence. Like you said, this information that you're sharing, there's some old sages, traditions that talk about this. And on the consciousness work, one of the main themes, as you said, really feel it fully. So get into the present, and obviously having tools, which your book, The Intelligent Body, gives you some tools to how to experience this. And the other part that seems to be a common theme that you just shared is it's an inside job, right? Make your inner world more real than your outer world. Get that vibration changing on the inside. And interestingly, it's been my experience, and you talk about this in your book, my experience is as I work on my inside. So rather than trying to change the outside, rather than trying to control and fix things on the outside, I'm just going in through my different types of meditative practices. And one of two things I've noticed: either the external world changes, like the external world becomes a reflection of my inner world, where you're like, this stuff, like it's spooky stuff, right? Like, well, it's not just like a weird thing. It's like, how did that really happen? I'm good with it. Thank you. Or the other thing is the external environment still looks the same, but how I perceive it now is different. So it's not causing negative or turmoil in my body. I'm at peace in that unhappy situation. And that's, you share this in your book, and this is how is your work as well, I understand.
And absolutely, it's completely that. It's that idea that, well, we are playing a role in the creation of the experience that we're having. And it's either those two things, as you said, either what is showing up in my life or my internal experience and how that changes based upon the things that show up. It's one of the interesting things, because there's so much on law of attraction and how I've got to create these things in my life. And for me, that comes from almost very often, it comes from a limited self space, a scarcity space. I've got to have things. I've got to have. The more you get into this sort of an expanded true self space where you feel connected to everything, it's like it doesn't seem to matter so much, the things that show up in your life. It just happens that better things probably do turn up for you.
And I like this, the law of attraction, because this kind of plays into this work plays into it. But it becomes less about these material objects, which people are thinking the law of attraction. And really the biggest part of the manifestation is your experience, the feeling. That's the key. And then it's the journey. That's the feeling part. And then the physical, the job, the relationship, the money, although we think that's what we want, like you said, you're actually coming from a state of lack. So you think you're trying to attract that, but what really the message you're putting out there is lack of that. So you get more of it, lack of that. Yeah. I want to let people know where they can learn more about you. So first of all, your book, I'm just holding up my phone here with your audio here so I can read it. The Intelligent Body. And so this is reversing chronic fatigue and pain from the inside out. And again, you talk about anxiety and depression. If people want to learn more about your coaching and your book, can you just share how people can get in touch with you and learn more about the services that you are offering?
So my website is energyflowcoaching.com. Find me on Facebook as Kyle Davies EFC. I think on Instagram I am Energy Flow Coach, and on Twitter Energy Flow Coach, and LinkedIn as Kyle Davies.
Perfect. So you can search Kyle Davies. You can go to The Intelligent Body and pick that up at your bookstore or your favorite online. It's a great place to start and check out his Energy Flow Coaching. I really enjoyed your book, Kyle. And again, I in my practice, I use functional medicine and acupuncture, and I've brought in, I call it belief change modalities, just trying to give it some type of name. But again, helping people change how they experience stuff. And your book just adds to that too. It was nice, reassuring to hear what you were sharing, and it just kind of adds to it. And I know you're changing lives. I experience it in my clinic. I experience for myself. It's nice to see that you've gone through the dark side. You went through a divorce, so it's not like life is sitting there pretty for you and you're saying, yeah, you can do this. You've gone through those external environment, big challenges in life, and we're able to come through that. So that's reassuring for people. I just, again, want to thank you for your time, and I want to encourage people to pick up a copy of your book, The Intelligent Body, and find Kyle through all those social media options that he shared with you. You'll feel better for it. So thank you very much.